All right, we're going to wait just another minute for people to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
You're muted.
That's embarrassing. All right, so I was just saying, I think we have a good group here, so we will go ahead and get started. So welcome to the fifth and final day of our 13th annual NOLA ILC Information Literacy Forum and our fifth online conference. We're so glad everyone could make it. I think we've had a really good week of presentations. We've really enjoyed all of them this past week. So my name is Caitlin Ford. I'm a member of the NOLA ILC Executive Board, and our chat monitor today is NOLA ILC Executive Board member Courtney Stortz. I'm going to go ahead and start by reading our land acknowledgement and action statement. So we'd like to start just by acknowledging the original inhabitants of this land. So the city of New Orleans is a continuation of a multicultural indigenous civilization on the Mississippi River, known for thousands of years as Bulbancha, a Choctaw term meaning place of many tongues. The Choctaw, Homa, Chitimacha, Biloxi, and other Native peoples have lived on this land since time immemorial, and the resilient voices of Native Americans remain an inseparable part of our local culture. The New Orleans Information Literacy Collective would not only like to acknowledge and honor the indigenous people of this land, but we also encourage our executive board, presenters, and attendees to shift their approach to land acknowledgements and consider meaningful activities and reparative actions to support Native communities. In consideration of our information literacy mission, we ask that over the course of the forum this week, if you haven't already, take some time to support Native authors. We recommend either reading a book by an Indigenous author, request a book from your local library, you can purchase a book from an Indigenous-owned bookstore, or purchase books for your library's collection. It costs nothing to rate and review Indigenous books, and it costs nothing to recommend a book to colleagues. This call to action is just a tangible way to help Native writers tell their stories, take back their narratives, and have their voices heard. These are just a few recommendations, but by no means do they encompass all of the ways in which you can support Native communities. We encourage you to continue learning and participating as we aim to avoid performativity and work to be equitable and inclusive of all. A link to this land acknowledgement with a list of useful resources can be found in the footer of the NOLA ILC website, and we're also providing a direct link in the chat now, along with a Padlet that we came up with of Indigenous authors and stories that we, the executive board members, recommend. So just a couple housekeeping things before we get to today's presenters. We have two presenters today. They're each going to speak for half an hour, and after that, we'll have time for questions from attendees. You can type your questions into the chat box at any time, though, and our chat moderator is going to keep track of them, and we'll make sure they're answered during the Q&A session. You can also use the chat box to let us know about any tech problems that you think might be originating on our end. And then finally, we're also dropping the URL to our link tree, which includes links for our social media channels, the land acknowledgement and action statement, and some other links as well. Just one last note that we will be recording this presentation and sharing it on our YouTube channel very soon. So without further ado, today we're honored to welcome Daniel DuPont with their presentation, I Don't Know What Trans Means, and at this point I'm too afraid to ask, Gender-Nonconforming Patrons and you, as well as Chandler Taylor, who's presenting from Mansfield, New Mexico, a case study in primary source research. So Daniel is a librarian at Delgado Community College in New Orleans, and he lives with 3 cat children and 1 human child. Danny, feel free to get started.
Thank you. Give me just a second. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay, hopefully y'all can see that.
Yes, we can.
Okay, there we go. So, thank you for joining me this morning. I also want to thank the NOLA ILC for having me. Thank all of you for being here. I want to remind you that this presentation is being recorded. So it's including the chat. Sometimes people will talk about, sort of vulnerable personal issues during this presentation. And just keep that in mind if you're typing anything into that chat or if you speak up with a question later on. Um, I'm also going to make all of these resources available. All the slides are going to be available. There's a QR code and a URL at the end. So no reason to have to stop and screenshot or anything as you go along. Everything's going to be available. And you can also, if you do have any of those concerns that you might not want to share with the group that you'd like to speak with me specifically about, you can always get in touch with me afterwards. So, presentation is, I don't know what trans means, and at this point, I'm too afraid to ask. Gender nonconforming students and you. I am Daniel DuPont. I'm a librarian and assistant professor at Delgado. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some kind of serious things. We're going to talk about, well, first, we're going to answer some questions. You probably have questions about some of the vocabulary you've heard surrounding trans issues or LGBTQ issues, like what is gender affirming care? What does it mean to be non-binary, that sort of thing. So we're going to look at some of that. We're going to talk about why you should make the effort to get pronouns right, how you can avoid misgendering students or patrons, and the big one, what do you do when you get it wrong? Because that's what everybody wants to know is, when I mess up, what do I do next? So I skipped forward too quick. So based on the topic of my presentation, you may be assuming that I am trans. Yes, I am. Good call. I am indeed trans. Um, my pronouns are he, him. I appreciate your compassion and empathy throughout my presentation because coming out is always a little bit scary. And every time I do this presentation, I am coming out to a group of peers, sometimes colleagues that I already know, sometimes strangers. So please keep that in mind that this is me making myself vulnerable to you. So me. As I said, I'm a librarian and assistant professor at Delgado Community College in New Orleans. I research best practices for LGBTQ plus populations in libraries and in higher education. I research and develop best practices for digital accessibility. I've got 3 cat children and 1 human child. I have an uncanny knack for being really annoying about niche media. Last year it was Our Flag Means Death. This year it's Schitt's Creek. I'm reading 365 books this year. I think I'm going to hit 220 today. I think I'm going to finish one today. I'll be 220. And I do not recommend this. Everybody is like, oh, I wish I could read more. No, it's not healthy. Don't do that. It's not a good thing to put yourself through. So I hope to answer some of the questions you may already have and want to define some terms. Uh, what is misgendering? Misgendering means to refer to someone, especially a transgender person, using a word, pronoun, or form of address that does not correctly reflect their gender. So there are some examples. If you use he, him pronouns, masculine pronouns for someone who uses they, them, calling a trans woman sir, referring to a trans man as Mrs. Dead names, to call a transgender person by their birth name when they have changed their name as part of their gender transition. Um, and its dead name may seem kind of dramatic, but that's how serious it is for some people, that it is not their birth name, it is their dead name. It no longer exists to them. Um, and you want to keep that in mind, that it can be really affecting to some people to hear that dead name. And gender transitions, the process of shifting towards a gender role different from that assigned at birth. There's really 2 kinds of transition, social transition and medical transition. Social includes things like changing names, pronouns, and clothing. Like, for instance, I've legally changed my name. I use different pronouns than I grew up with. I for a long time, I wear all men's clothing because it has better pockets. Um, and medical transition can include such things as hormone therapy and surgery. Those are like the main things in medical transition. Um, Transitioning is not required to be transgender. A person may identify as transgender, but never socially or medically transition. That is okay. They are still trans. So, what is trans? What does trans mean? Anyone whose gender identity differs from the sex they were assigned at birth. Non-binary is when a gender identity or gender expression fall outside the gender binary. Other terms include age gender, gender fluid, gender queer, more. These are sort of nuanced terms and they can be very personal to the whoever's using that term for themselves. But we're just going to kind of under the banner of non-binary for our discussion. Now, I know that people have questions about the difference between gender and sexuality and what they mean. And we use the term queer here, and some people think that it means very specifically whether you're homosexual, heterosexual, bisexual. It doesn't necessarily, it can apply to gender as well. But I have a quick video for you to watch.
So, just to be clear, I'm a red wine drinker.
That's fine.
Okay, cool. I only drink red wine.
Okay.
And up until last night, I was under the impression that you too only drank red wine. But I guess I was wrong.
I see where you're going with this. I do drink red wine, but I also drink white wine.
Oh.
And I've been known to sample the occasional rosé. And a couple summers back, I tried a Merlot that used to be a Chardonnay, which got a bit complicated.
Okay, yeah, so you're just really open to all wines.
I like the wine and not the label. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yeah, I love that. I like the wine and not the label. That's one of the sort of iconic scenes out from this show. So, what is cisgender? You might hear the term cisgender and know that it's somebody who's not trans, but what is it? It's anyone whose gender identity is aligned with the sex they were assigned at birth. Trans means it's just a Latin word that means on the other side, and cis means on this side. So, if you're cisgender, you're just on the same side of the sex you were assigned at birth. Assigned sex at birth is the sex assigned to an infant at birth based on external characteristics, and that's really important that these are the external characteristics. About 1 in 2,000 babies is born with ambiguous genitalia, and for the most part, they just make their best guess. And sometimes it ends up being correct and sometimes not. AFAB is assigned female at birth. AMAB is assigned male at birth. Sometimes when I need to be more specific, I'll say that I'm AFAB. I'm assigned female at birth, even though I'm a trans man. Gender identity and expression. So gender identity is a deeply held knowledge of one's own gender, and expression is outward signifiers of that gender. Gender nonconforming, or GNC, is someone whose gender expression, but not identity, differs from conventional expectations of masculinity and femininity. So someone may be cisgender, but have gender expression that is outside of the conventional expectations. Like, for instance, I always use the example of a man wearing eyeliner. That's outside of the conventional expectations of masculinity, but that person still identifies as a man. So they're still cisgender. They're doing something that's gender nonconforming. I do want to mention that about 1.7% of the population falls outside of the XX or XY binary. That's about the same as the percentage of natural redheads. You definitely know somebody who is single X, triple X, X. I think XYY is really fairly it's fairly prevalent. Or they have like maybe a little bit of a missing, somebody who has like a Y chromosome that's a little bit is missing off of it. These are things that they're very normal. It happens a lot. And we need to keep that in mind when we talk about defining what sex and gender are, that we can't just break it down into an XX or XY binary. That's not the case. So
Daniel,
let's
can
talk
we
about gender.
pause 1 second?
Sure.
Some of us are seeing a gray rectangle at the top of your slides and it's covering up some of the text. I'm wondering if maybe if you stop sharing and then reshare,
Okay.
if it might
I
fix it.
think what that is,
Oh, there it is.
that's
Yep.
the, okay, I think it's the
The screen share
Zoom
banner.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Because you just moved it to the middle of the screen now, right?
yeah.
Okay.
Is there a way to hide that?
I don't know.
Um, okay. Let's
I
stop
think there's
screen
a way
sharing.
that you can minimize it in the top corner. Is there like some dots or a arrow or
There's some
something?
dots that say more. Um,
Because yeah, it is covering up.
hide. Okay, hide
Okay,
the. There we go.
there we go.
How's that?
Nope, now it's in the middle.
I'm seeing it in the middle,
Okay,
right
give
where
it a.
it says facial. There we go. Okay.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, that was
Thank you
something
so
saying
much.
it's okay. That was saying it's press escape to bring the video controls back. That's what it showed up in the middle for a second
All
there.
right. Great. Thank you
Okay.
so much. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. Sorry about that. I've never had that happen before. Um, so what is gender affirming medical care? You may have heard people talking about gender affirming medical care in the news. There's lots of legislation about it. This is different for everyone. Every trans person is getting gender affirming medical care that's particular to them. Anyone who does decide to medically transition. So two of the big ways are hormone replacement therapy is one of the main ways. It's feminizing or masculinizing hormone therapy. Examples are just like testosterone injections, oral capsules, gels, creams. And the same thing for estrogen injections, pills, topical gels. Surgeries. So I get asked, it hasn't happened in a while, but I've been asked, have you had the surgery? Never ask anybody that. I don't want to know what you look like under your clothes. Why would you ask me? Um, but these are some of the surgeries there are. There's not just one surgery. Like I said, every trans person is different. Every trans person who decides to decides to medically transition will have a different sort of experience of this. There is facial reconstructive surgery, which is surgery to make facial features more masculine or feminine. Top surgery is surgery to remove breast tissue for a more masculine appearance or enhance breast size for a more feminine appearance. My experience of knowing trans women, though, is that once they go on estrogen, that problem usually takes care of itself. But the surgery is there if that's something they want. And bottom surgery is surgery to transform and reconstruct the genitalia. And you may have in your mind what that is. It's not. There's lots of different types of bottom surgery. So what about for minors? Because that's what people have been talking about a lot recently. So the Endocrine Society recommends transgender adolescents not begin hormone therapy until they can give informed consent, which is usually around age 16 at the earliest. Earlier than 16, they say give them puberty blockers. So with hormone therapy, some of the changes are irreversible. With puberty blockers, it delays the onset of secondary sex characteristics, which can prevent gender nonconforming children from experiencing gender dysphoria in the same way. They don't produce irreversible changes. There can be some side effects, which need to be discussed with the patient and the family. But once the child goes off of puberty blockers, then puberty will run its course. It'll step back in. Gender affirming surgery is very rare for minors, especially minors under 16. I tried looking up some numbers from the Louisiana Department of Health, and it was like one in the last like 5 years or something. It's very, very rare. So we talked a little bit about informed consent, that the Endocrine Society recommends that minors be able to give informed consent before they can begin hormone therapy. What is informed consent? It's an ethical and legal requirement for medical treatment. You have to understand and agree to treatment before it can proceed. So it's 4 elements of informed consent. It's real. It's just the healthcare provider has to verify that you can understand and make decisions. They have to disclose enough information. They have to judge that you understand the information, and then you have to freely authorize the treatment plan. So when I began hormone therapy, my doctor just ran through the pros and cons, told me, what the potential side effects and downsides of it could be, and then we went forward with it. I didn't have to do anything. They assumed I had the mental capacity to make that judgment on my own. There are other places like in the UK, they don't necessarily do that. They don't use informed consent. They have to judge and make sure that the patient has the mental capacity to make the decision. They run them through a battery of tests. Um, if you have had a recent procedure, you've probably done some sort of informed consent. I get regular Botox for migraines, and every time I have to go in and sign a form saying I know it can cause like eye paralysis and death. So that's informed consent. So why does this matter? Why should you make the effort to get someone's pronouns right? It definitely does take effort. So we're going to not have any funny images for a little bit because we're going to get into some really serious topics. In a 2023 survey of 18,663 LGBTQ plus youth, ages 13 to 24, including 9,800 plus transgender and non-binary youth, nearly half of trans and non-binary youth considered suicide in the past year. That's a lot. Just a moment. Sorry about that. Somebody was asking me a question. Somebody was asking me for financial aid. 14% of trans and non-binary youth attempted suicide. Sorry. Yeah. A little over half of trans and non-binary youth found their school to be gender affirming. Affirming spaces are linked to lower rates of anxiety and depression and lower rates of attempted suicide. So if they have those gender affirming spaces, it really lowers the chance that they will they attempt suicide, that they'll try to unalive themselves. Over 70% of trans and non-binary youth reported experiencing symptoms of anxiety, 60% experienced symptoms of depression. 50% of LGBTQ plus youth who wanted mental health care in the past year were not able to get it. Reasons cited for being unable to access mental health care: they didn't want to ask their parents for permission to receive virtual care at home. They thought they might not be taken seriously, or they were going to look weak because they were afraid they'd be outed, or fear of the police, or being involuntarily hospitalized, which that's not great. I think some of that comes from how we've been looking at criminalizing some issues surrounding LGBTQ plus materials in libraries, for instance, and kids are getting scared. So it's bad for everyone, but some have it worse. 10% of white LGBTQ plus youth attempted suicide in 2023, compared to 24% of Native and Indigenous youth, 14% of Middle Eastern North African youth, 14% of Black youth, 16% of multiracial youth, 13% of Latin youth, and 10% of Asian American Pacific Islander youth. And I want to make the point here that this is attempted suicide. This does not count those who succeeded. This is a survey that the Trevor Project did, where youth are self-reporting, and you can't get those numbers on somebody who succeeded in killing themselves. So these numbers are higher. We just want to keep that in mind. So, violence against trans people. The world isn't kind to trans folks. 28% of trans and non-binary youth reported being physically threatened or harmed because of their gender identity. 2021 study found that trans people ages 16 and over were more than 4 times as likely as cisgender people to be the victims of violent crime. Trans households had almost 2 times the rate of property victimization. A 2022 study found that trans youth ages 14 to 16 were more than twice as likely as cis peers to experience sexual violence, but they were no more likely to commit sexual violence. There's obviously been a lot of LGBTQ legislation. Can feel like the government is out to get us sometimes. I know I feel that. 61% of youth on gender affirming hormones were afraid of losing access to care. 90% of LGBTQ plus youth said anti-LGBTQ plus policies and legislation negatively impacted mental health. 45% of trans and non-binary youth said they or their family have considered moving to a different state because of anti-LGBTQ plus politics. That's crazy that you're thinking of picking up and moving your family because the situation is so dire where you are. And I do know people who've done that. I knew somebody who a couple years ago left Texas because of the laws that they were starting to put forward. I also want to point out something with these numbers. Some of the numbers at the beginning, like the prevalence of anxiety and depression, the rate of attempted suicide, those numbers are looking better than they were last year. The sample size went way, way down this year. And this 90% of LGBTQ plus youth saying that the legislation negatively impacted mental health, that number is way up. So that number going up, and then we're seeing some of these other numbers go down. I think kids were just afraid to respond to the survey and to answer questions. That is my editorializing on that. So let's look at some recent legislation in Louisiana. These are things that apply specifically to parental, youth, and student rights. Act 2023 Act 466 bans gender-affirming care for minors. It was an override of the governor's veto. It went into effect at the beginning of this year. Minors have until the end of December, till the end of the year, to wean off. 2024 Act 681, the Don't Say Gay, Trans, Queer bill. It bans discussion of sexual orientation or gender identity in schools. School employees can't discuss their own sexual orientation or gender, even outside of classroom time. Act 680 is the name and pronoun regulation in schools bill, forces school officials to use the name and pronouns that correlate with students' birth certificates, forces the school to misgender trans students, even except with parental consent. So if the student comes forward and says, I use she, her pronouns, the teacher could in the past take it upon themselves and go ahead and respect that student and gender them correctly. Now they're no longer allowed to do that. It's against the rules, it's against the law for them to do that. But it also, even if a parent gives consent to use chosen name and chosen pronouns, the employees can choose to misgender students if they just don't like trans people. So Act 436, called the Trans Erasure Bill, rigidly defines sex in state law. Act 680 does this too. In some ways, it's really reductive. It's one of the ways it defines like woman is able to get pregnant, like able to conceive, something like that. So it's not great. It's used for public and charter school restrooms, domestic violence shelters, and correctional facilities. These last three, 681, 680, and 436, they all went into effect yesterday. So here's some stuff that y'all are probably, as librarians, more familiar with. Act 436 from last year, this was the Collection Development Community Standards. Libraries had until June 1st to implement their policies, potentially defunds libraries that failed to comply. Act 359, it allowed the parish council to add members to the Livingston Parish Board of Control, which is obviously them just trying to stuff the library board. 2024 HB 640 and HB 946, you'll notice these are not acts, they did not pass, but it would have authorized a parish or municipality to remove any member of its library board of control at any time, with or without cause. 640 failed to pass in the 2024 session. It could potentially come back next year. 946 was involuntarily deferred, which to my understanding means it's not coming back, but I mean, like 640 is there, so. And then HB 545 and 414 would have removed exemptions from crime of obscenity law for public schools and public libraries. Libraries and schools are currently exempt from criminal obscenity laws. It would have potentially criminalized staff for the presence of obscene materials, which when you start criminalizing materials like that, you can start getting an idea of why a kid may be concerned about police getting involved should they come out. So anti-LGBTQ plus legislation in the news. We all hear about regional and national news. As of August 1st, I pulled these numbers yesterday, there have been more than 630 anti-LGBTQ plus bills introduced in the US in 2024, including 74 federal bills. This is the 5th consecutive record year for anti-trans and anti-LGBTQ plus legislation. According to the ACLU, the number of anti-LGBTQ plus bills introduced at the state level in 2019 was 51. In 2018, it was 42. In 2024, so far, it's 630. So that's a whole lot of angst there. There have been 165 gender-affirming care bans proposed in 2024. 24 states have passed those bans in 2023 and 2024. 19 of these, I think 19 were in 2023, and then 5 were in 2024. Louisiana is among them. Ours was last year. There have been 30 plus anti-trans bathroom bills in 2023 and 2024, over 200 curriculum censorship bills in 2024, and 29 anti-LGBTQ plus drag performance bans in 2024. But we can make things better. We can create affirming spaces and affirm kids' identity, and affirm our patrons' identity. LGBTQ plus young people who had access to affirming homes, schools, community events, and online spaces reported lower rates of attempted suicide compared to those who did not. Affirming gender identity is consistently associated with lower rates of attempted suicide. This is, about trans people, but affirming sexuality is also, that's just the general LGBTQ youth populace. It's also associated with lower rates of attempted suicide. Actions that LGBTQ plus youth report wanting people in their lives to take to show support. Stand up for them, not support anti-LGBTQ plus politicians. Research and ask about LGBTQ plus identities, respect pronouns, showing support for their gender expression, publicly showing support on social media and by displaying pride flags. So y'all are already taking a bunch of these steps right now. So y'all are asking about LGBTQ plus identities, learning about them. You're learning how to respect pronouns. You're learning how to support gender expression. They're not asking for anyone to go out and like march in the streets. They just want to know that they're supported, loved, cared for as they are. And this, publicly showing support on social media by displaying pride flags, it can mean so much to a kid to have a pride flag on the library's social media during Pride Month. Like that's just seeing that, it would be a big thing for somebody who doesn't have any other affirming spaces. So let's shake out the bad vibes. That sucked. Now you know why. Let's talk about how. How can you avoid misgendering students, patrons, or anyone else? Because here's Alexis saying, we have a situation on our hands that needs to be solved now. We need to fix this. So it's actually really simple. Don't challenge someone's identity. Avoid use of sir and ma'am. Don't refer to students as male or female. Use singular they when you don't know someone's gender. And there's really only two things you do. You don't challenge someone's identity, and then don't gender people that you don't know. That's once you know them, once you know what the pronouns they use, what they want to be called, gender to your heart's content. But just don't gender people you don't know, and don't challenge someone's identity. It's really easy. Now, about the sir and the ma'am thing, I know I get a lot of pushback that people say that's polite, especially being here in the South, that it's polite to use sir and ma'am. From Emily Post said, it is essential to good etiquette to call people what they want to be called. This was specifically about not using sir and ma'am. So just keep that in mind, that good manners are about making the other person comfortable, not making yourself comfortable. So if you think that saying that being polite, whatever you're doing to be polite might hurt the person, that's not good manners. My words to live by are always, what I should have said was nothing. So when in doubt, say nothing. So here are some quick do's and don'ts. Don't say you don't look or sound like a David. I get that one a lot, which I think is silly. I know women named Ryan. Ryan, when I was growing up, I thought was just a boy's name. There's lots of people who have Beverly, Mallory, Carol are all men's names. Like, you don't know. So don't say things like that, except student or patron's identity. If you need to confirm they're who they say they are, use other information such as phone number, home address, or birth date. Don't say, may I speak to Mr. Brewer? Say, may I speak to Patrick Brewer? May I speak to Patrick? Instead of how can I help you, ma'am? How can I help you? If you're sending an email, instead of saying dear sir or ma'am or dear Mrs. whoever, you can say, just start hello, good morning, good afternoon. If you don't feel comfortable using that person's first name. Instead of saying, excuse me, sir, just say, excuse me, please. I know that excuse me, sir has like the beats are good. Excuse me feels like something should come after it. Excuse me, please, says that. Instead of saying the woman over there needs help, you say the student, instructor, patron over there needs help. And other ways to do that are saying the person in the blue shirt, person with blonde hair, person standing by the window. And I would encourage you to take this beyond just gender instead of saying the Asian lady over there needs help or the black man over there needs help. We don't need to identify people in those same ways when we can just say, you know, one person's wearing a red shirt, one person's wearing a blue shirt. We can say the person with the blue shirt. Other things you can do is like instead of saying hello, ma'am, hello there, good morning, good afternoon, thank you, sir, thank you very much. That also says that sort of beats issue with thank you, sir, thank you very much. Instead of saying good morning, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, everyone. Here's a few more. Instead of using gender terms, say like chairperson, firefighter, police officer, mail carrier. This is one that this is my personal like bugaboo. Manpower or man the reference desk. Staff the reference desk. We need someone to staff the reference desk. Husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend. You could say spouse, partner, significant other, parent, grandparent, siblings. Instead of like just generally men, women, ladies and gentlemen, y'all, people, everyone, everybody, folks, colleagues, comrades, crew, every pony, beloved friends and tolerated acquaintances, mateys, little meow meows, discerning guests, and those of you with nothing else to do on a Friday morning. And I want to be really clear here that we're not getting rid of gendered words. We're just using ungendered words until we know more about the individual. I know I have a really dear friend who part of her identity is tied to being a wife, and she doesn't want to be called a spouse or a partner. She wants to be called a wife. That is fine because she has chosen that for herself. It's that we're not using these words on someone who hasn't chosen them. So about using singular they, it's super easy. Use they for people whose pronouns you don't know, and for people who use they, them pronouns. Ask others what their pronouns are, but offer yours first. Don't just ask the people who look kind of sus. Hey, what are your pronouns? Because that's really singling them out. And remember that a trans or non-binary person's pronouns are not their preferred pronouns. Pronouns they use are their pronouns, and that's it. I don't have. Get comfortable with using singular they. It's not new. In modern English, the first use of singular they is in 1375, and in modern English, it's each man hurried till they drew near, where William and his darling were lying there. That's from 1375 in William and the Werewolf, and each man is singular, they is plural. It should be each man hurried till he drew near if you were going to make it agree in number. From the Wycliffe Bible from 1382, each one in their craft is wise. That Bible. The Bible is using singular they. And then William Bond, 1526. If a psalm escape any person or a lesson, or else if they omit one verse or twain. So again, person is singular, they is plural. It goes way, way back. So here's a few more examples that are more recent. Tom Jones. I really like this Emily Dickinson one. Almost anyone under the circumstances would have doubted if the letter were theirs, or indeed if they were themselves, but to us it was clear. I like just her use of themselves there. This is from 1881, it was in Vanity Fair, singular they in the Liberal magazine, and then C.S. Lewis in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. She kept her head and kicked her shoes off, as everybody ought to do who falls into deep water in their clothes. Now, I know that even with all these examples, some of you are internally screaming, grammar, what's a grammar? What will we do about the grammar? The major style guides all say to respect personal pronouns. If someone uses they, them pronouns, use they, them pronouns for that person. AP is a little shiftier, but they do say not to misgender someone by assigning an incorrect pronoun to them. So that's something. What about formal writing? So again, singular they is always fine for people who use they, them pronouns, even in formal writing. If the gender isn't known, you can just reword. The Chicago Manual of Style doesn't prohibit singular they as a substitute for generic he, but it recommends avoiding using it. And especially it says to avoid his, her, he, she, that's just awkward. But in general, rewording is best. So here's an example. It may seem like I just can't reword it. Instead of each student is expected to choose their topic, students are expected to choose their topic. Each student is expected to choose a topic. So we remove the need to make things agree in number, or we just change the word so they agree in number. But always, 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 if the gender is known and the person uses they, them, you can use they, them pronouns. You don't have to reword that. So what do you do when you get it wrong? I put this like Moira saying, any fool could do that. Did you do that? No, because it's not just that you will get it wrong, I get it wrong. Trans people misgender themselves. It's something that happens all the time. And if I can't even get my gender right all the time, you're not going to. So let's get some, let's sort of prepare ourselves for what to do after that. You're going to slip up. It happens to everyone, even trans people. It's going to be okay. Don't center yourself or your feelings about misgendering the other person. Don't go on about how sorry you are. That will only make the person you just misgendered feel more awkward, or even that they have to comfort you. Just apologize and move on. You don't want to make it about you. Don't give up. Using correct pronouns is not optional. Keep trying. Now I have this slide titled Trans Anger. What if the person I just misgendered gets really, really angry? And that's going to happen sometimes. Most people are going to be completely cool, but some will get angry, even if your mistake is in good faith. But remember, don't go on about how sorry you are. Don't try to explain yourself or why you made the mistake. Really don't do that. Saying, I'm sorry, it's just that you really look like a man, my mistake, or I'm sorry, you just have a really feminine voice. That will make the situation worse. Don't try to absolve yourself in that way. Just apologize. Apologize again. But if they don't accept your apology the second time, just move on. Try to empathize and meet the other person with compassion and understanding. But you want them to accept your apology. You're doing the best you can. You're trying, and you want them to accept your apology. But remember all those slides and statistics at the beginning? Things are really bad. Things can be really scary. You might not be the first person to misgender them today. You might not be the 10th. I get misgendered just going to work and home. I'll be misgendered dozens of times a day. So it's not, it builds up over time. Trans folks are constantly being misgendered, often maliciously. It's hard to know when someone is a friend and someone's making a genuine mistake. My default is to be wary of others until they've proven they'll treat me with respect. There's a couple of ways they can do that really non-verbally. Pronouns and email. I know that I'm safe with that person. If I'm at a conference, if they have their pronouns on their badge, they're wearing one of those little pronoun flags on the badge. I'm not saying that this is something you have to do, but it's one of those things where it's like, oh, I know that I'm going to be okay with this person. And that may seem unfair to all the cis allies, but wariness is how we as trans people keep ourselves safe. If, just remember that their anger and resentment likely has nothing to do with you personally. Apologize, empathize, and do better next time. So that's it for me. Here's some resource guides that we have at Delgado. Here's some information for trans people in crisis. Best wishes, warmest regards. If you have any questions, I am happy to help. This is the URL to get to the presentation slides and all the resources are linked. And I think the link is being dropped. It's not a bit.ly version of it, it's just the straight link being dropped in the chat. This QR code will get you there too. I included my work email if you'd like to chat, but also included my personal email if you want to speak privately about gender identity over email accounts that are not owned by our employers. So there you go.
Great. Thank you so much, Daniel. That was wonderful and very informative. Just a reminder, we'll save questions for the end, for the Q&A session, but feel free to drop them in the chat if you know what you want to ask now, and we'll keep track of that. So next we have Chandler Taylor, who will be presenting From Mansfield to Mexico, a case study in primary source research. Chandler is joining us from Mansfield, Ohio, where she's the local history and genealogy reference librarian at the Richland Public Library. So I will hand it over to you, Chandler.
All right. So yeah, that's a bit of a tough act to follow. Very good information. I learned a lot from that, for sure, that I hadn't really considered before. And I try to be really, conscious of my choices when working with people. So I will try to share my screen. Let me know if that wackadoo bar thing is there. Back over here. I only do Zoom like once a year, so this feels like the struggle bus for me right now.
Well, we can see your screen, and I'll hang out here till we get in presentation mode to make sure that that bar isn't covering anything up. I had never seen that before, so.
All right, how do we feel about it?
We're still seeing your Canva screen. I don't know if you have multiple monitors.
No, I don't. Did I click the wrong one?
I'm still seeing Canva. Oh,
Oh,
now we just see click to exit full screen.
there you go. See, I
Okay,
should have just
it's
done
gone
it.
black, so maybe it's loading. I don't know. There we go. Okay, that looks good to me, and I don't see any text covered by any mysterious black bars, so I think you're good to go.
Okay, awesome. All right, so thanks for joining us today for the final presentation of NOLA ILC 2024. My name, as she said, is Chandler Taylor, and I'm the local history and genealogy reference librarian for the Mansfield Richland County Public Library. It's a very long title, in Mansfield, Ohio. So part of my job as their local history librarian is to maintain the local history blog for the library. And my presentation today, From Mansfield to Mexico, is based on the first blog post I wrote this year, which was also called From Mansfield to Mexico. And that came out of some serendipity research, as I call it. I spent some of my early days, I started this job in January, so I spent some of my early days just going through our collection of city directories, flipping through them every page. I was looking to just note any damage that we had. And as I was flipping through them, page after page, I was following the advertisements on the top right page, which were primarily for one local bakery. They're your typical advertisements for candy, cake, ice cream. But then I saw a couple for cigars and the bakery's oysters. And I just had to know more about this crazy bakery selling cigars and oysters. And when I started to dig into the research for that, I mostly just found more advertisements for the bakery. But then there was a small story about the bakery owner leaving for Mexico, which opened a whole new set of questions. So today what I'm going to focus on, I'm first going to share this story from Mansfield to Mexico as it appeared on the blog with a few edits for time. And then I'm going to talk about the research databases I used in building the research for the blog. I ultimately utilized my personal account for some of the databases, which begs the question of what may have fallen through the cracks if I was only using what the library makes accessible to our patrons. It's something I think is important for us to consider, especially if we are working with students or patrons doing that higher level research for thesis or dissertation work, and also for me thinking about those who are doing that extensive genealogy research. Because it's not just about offering access to information, but ensuring that access is actually functional and useful. So now on to the story of a Mansfield baker in Mexico. In early August 1916, Roy Antibus received a letter from an old friend, L.N. Loisel, detailing the harrowing experience of Loisel and his wife as they were evacuated from Veracruz, Mexico. According to Loisel, on June 20th, the Americans living in Veracruz were all notified to go on shipboard for protection, where they were held for 10 days. Loisel and the other Americans had been instructed to take nothing with them except the clothes on their backs, which resulted in Loisel and his wife losing approximately $500 worth of valuables when their trunks were broken into at the large plantation house they had been living in. It was expected that the United States would declare war on Mexico, not just on behalf of Loisel and the other Americans in that country, of course, but no such declaration was made, and Loisel tells Antibus that a great amount of this pillage could have been stopped had President Wilson blockaded all the Mexican ports while the natives were fighting their differences among themselves. Loisel was writing from the front lines of the Mexican Revolution. In their report on this dramatic letter, the Mansfield News notes that Loisel left Mansfield in 1908 to become manager of a plantation of 5,000 acres near Veracruz. According to the paper's editors, all went well until the revolutions began. Loisel would slightly disagree, as he wrote in a 1917 affidavit for the American consul in Mexico, quote, "I came to Mexico in 1908 as general manager of the Pan American Planters Company, a corporation then existing under the laws of the state of Indiana on a 10 years contract. The company gave me money to come to Mexico, but failed to send any further funds. I have been endeavoring to put through proceedings to sell the property, which is located in a district controlled by the rebels," end quote. So how did Loisel find himself working for an Indiana company in the heart of Mexico at the height of the Mexican Revolution? Louis Napoleon Loisel was born in Montreal, Canada on November 2nd, 1858, the firstborn of Edward and Rose Loisel. The family immigrated to the United States in late 1862, settling in Keene, New Hampshire. According to A.J. Bauman's 1901 Centennial Biographical History of Richland County, Loisel came to Mansfield in 1885, where he spent several years traveling as a representative of John W. Wagner's wholesale hardware establishment. Loisel later became associated with Crawford and Taylor, proprietors of a wholesale bakery. By January 1893, Loisel had fully invested in the baking business and purchased the Ulick Bakery at Main and Bloom. It is unclear how much training Loisel received in the actual process of baking, but he was apparently so confident in his products that he took out advertisements in the top right margin of every other page of the 1894 Mansfield City Directory, which equates to 75 one-line advertisements. These ads boast all leading grocers sell Loisel's bread, buns, and rolls, and announce that Loisel leads the procession in frying breads, pies, cakes, buns, etc. Loisel certainly moved quickly in the world of confections. In January 1900, he catered a celebratory dinner for the employees of the Mansfield News, and the bakery became a favored meeting place for the Mansfield Lyceum and the trustees of the City Union. Loisel was even appointed to the Weights and Measures Committee of the Mansfield Chamber of Commerce in 1902. It's no wonder A.J. Bauman had called Loisel one of the most prominent, influential, and successful citizens of Mansfield, Ohio, back in 1901. As Loisel's business continued to grow and expand into a leading producer of purified milk and quality ice cream, Loisel joined Roy Antibus and Byron Balliet in organizing a businessman's bicycle club, of which Loisel was elected president. He and Balliet also have helped make Gatton's Rocks in Belleville, Ohio, a favorite summer resort in the late 1890s. It's entirely possible that Loisel's circle of friends at this time brought him into contact with Silas Arthur Jennings, who in his capacity as cashier of the Citizens National Bank in Mansfield, had traveled to Mexico in 1904 to inspect the Santa Isabel plantation operated by the Pan American Planters Company. In a talk Jennings gave in March 1904, he praised the work being done on the plantation, and the Mansfield News noted that many Mansfield people held interest in the plantation. Exactly when Loisel first became involved, the Pan American Planters Company remains unclear, but his wife Sarah wrote in 1919 that her husband was a stockholder in the company prior to their move to Mexico. Perhaps it was Loisel's passion for bicycles that attracted him to this venture in rubber cultivation, or perhaps he was enticed by advertisements promising a real estate investment of absolute security. As Irving S. Hoffman, general manager of the Mansfield Telephone Company, said in 1903, "Rubber culture is still in its infancy in Mexico, but it is going to become a great industry in the near future." After traveling to the Santa Isabel plantation, Hoffman was reportedly enthusiastic over the possibilities. Unlike Hoffman, Loisel was a silent investor at best, since he had made no public statements related to his interest in the company prior to being called to Mexico in 1908. The Pan American Planters Company of Indianapolis, incorporated in Chicago in October 1900, was certainly not alone in establishing a presence in Mexico. In fact, a Missouri company incorporated under the laws of South Dakota owned land adjacent to the Santa Isabel plantation. So close were the two properties, they employed the same plantation manager, James Bryden. The Indianapolis Journal suggests Bryden was a Mexican citizen, which makes it difficult to track his professional work beyond the few trips he made to Elwood, Indiana, St. Joseph, Missouri, and Mansfield to promote the plantations he managed. The India Rubber World, a leading magazine for the rubber industry, says Bryden joined both plantation ventures with 10 years' experience in Mexico, while the Mexican Herald notes Bryden's long residence on the isthmus helped him gain an intimate knowledge of the conditions necessary to carry to a successful issue an enterprise of this nature. There's a fire truck outside. He is widely and favorably known among isthmus planters. Countless advertisements soliciting investors through local newspapers in Mansfield and Elwood, Indiana, put a lot of confidence behind Bryden, promising experienced and honest management. Prospective investors in Mansfield were also likely to find it reassuring that Mansfield and Ohio were prominently represented on the advertised board of the company. Counted among the top brass were Charles Foster, former Ohio governor and former Secretary of the U.S. Treasury, and Charles Henry Vogela, manager of the confectionery company Vogela and Dinning, among other ventures. In the May 2nd, 1903 issue of Popular Mechanics, Vogela and Foster are the first two men listed under officers and directors. In fact, Charles Foster had served as the company's president since its incorporation in 1900, and Vogela became his successor. Foster's role as a former secretary of the U.S. Treasury surely bolstered trust in the company for early investors. At the first annual stockholders meeting in Elwood in 1903, close to 100 officers, directors, and shareholders were in attendance, with leading officers and directors coming from Chicago, Mansfield, and Indianapolis. Although the company reportedly closed a deal in July 1905 for the erection of a sugar mill on the plantation property, things seemed to start falling apart following the death of Charles Foster in 1904. We see, at least in Elwood, where company reports were published far more frequently, classified ads like this one for the sale of company stock. What these ads suggest is that at least one person in that city was trying to offload their stock, and they were willing to take a 10% loss in their sale. Not to mention, buried on page 10 of Chicago's The Inter-Ocean newspaper on Saturday, June 4th, 1904, there is a notice from Cheney and Evans attorneys calling for a special meeting of the Pan American Planters stockholders for the purpose of considering the question of abandoning the corporate enterprise and surrendering the franchise and corporate name of the said corporation. On August 12, 1904, it was announced again in a blink and you'll miss it spot on page 11 of the Inter-Ocean that this corporation be, and the same is hereby, dissolved. Despite this announcement, advertisements for the Pan American Planters Company as a real estate investment continued to appear in the Mansfield News. The call leader of Elwood, Indiana, notes in September 1904 that G.H. Gilpatrick attended a directors meeting for the company in Chicago that very month, and the company still appears in the Chicago City Directory for 1905. Additionally, the company recruited another Ohioan, Professor John C. Boyd, as a local sales agent for shares of the company in Wooster, Ohio. If anything, the 1904 dissolution was superficial and only served to divest Cheney and Evans of their involvement, since promotional materials continued to be published, stock certificates continued to be sold, and a full report of the plantation's output for stockholders was published in June 1906. This is the only extant archival document produced by the company. One promotional piece published by the Wayne County Democrat in Wooster in 1904 indicates the company had a contract for the development and equipment of the property for 7 years ending October 1st, 1909. Now, whether the 1909 date remained firm in the years after this advertisement was published is debatable, since no other mentions of it in the press have been found. It is further debatable that the company would hold firm to this 1909 date if they offered Loisel a 10-year contract in 1908. All of these dates and questions of whether the Pan American Planters Company was actually dissolved or not suggest the company may not have been operating by the book, and certainly corporate scandal is nothing new to American history. Current Illinois law specifies that dissolution of a corporation terminates its corporate existence, and a dissolved corporation shall not thereafter carry on any business except that necessary to wind up and liquidate its business and affairs. By continuing to operate and promote the business, G.H. Gilpatrick, John C. Boyd, and Silas Jennings, among others, would have been personally liable for anything done on behalf of the company. It's also possible, but equally questionable, that the company reincorporated in Indiana in early August 1904. Other reports suggest the company filed for a trademark registration in Indiana as early as August 1902. But federal documents and trade publications continued to list Chicago as the headquarters for the company, even after its supposed dissolution and possible reincorporation. By mid-1908, news of the company simply dries up, and we are left to piece together the rest of the story through Loisel's letters and passport applications. Even as coverage of the company's dealings dwindled in the U.S., American companies in Mexico, like the Pan American Planters Company, were enjoying a robust relationship with the Mexican government. Mexican President Porfirio Diaz had made it a priority, building off the goals of his predecessor, Benito Juarez, to court foreign investment from the United States and Europe. According to John A. Crow, the late 19th and early 20th centuries were the golden age of Mexican economics for the elite classes, where 1 peso was worth $3.2. This led to rapid but highly unequal economic growth in Mexico, and by the early 1900s, there was growing unrest within the working classes. Diaz had systematically worked to suppress workers' unions through force of the police and army, but workers still began to organize and orchestrate labor strikes. In 1906, a strike at the US-owned Cananea Consolidated Copper Company resulted in 23 deaths at the hands of US Marshals who had crossed the border from Arizona. This strike and the violence that followed were evidence of the increasing labor unrest in Mexico, and the fact Diaz's regime did nothing in response to the US's outright violation of Mexican sovereignty only highlighted tensions. Back on the Santa Isabel plantation, company leaders announced in 1905 that Joseph W. Abrams, a Maryland man who had been working on a coffee plantation in Mexico for 12 years, would be replacing James Bryden as plantation manager. Abrams even made a brief stop in Mansfield the following summer. In 1907, G.H. Gilpatrick, one of the company's 8 directors, reportedly left the company in favor of running a drugstore. The Elwood Daily Record cited Gilpatrick as saying the nomad life of traveling to sell stock in the Santa Isabel plantation was not to his liking, and he cut out. But Gilpatrick was still listed as a director of the company by the Odon Journal of Odon, Indiana in 1908, in a small mention about a company meeting in Indianapolis. Although we have no direct evidence, it is possible that Bryden, Gilpatrick, and others with the Pan American Planters Company saw the growing unrest as a warning of what was to come and chose to distance themselves from the Mexican enterprise before it was too late. That is, everyone, it would seem, except Louis Loisel. In April 1908, the Weekly News in Mansfield reported Loisel and his wife had recently returned from a trip to Mexico and were contemplating moving to that country. The particulars of what Loisel observed on this trip to Mexico were not disclosed in the press at the time, but any uneasiness he may have had did not deter him from disposing of all his interests and holdings in the Loisel Bread and Milk Company and resigning as the company's treasurer and general manager in August 1908. He was apparently all in on the Santa Isabel plantation, and the Loisels sailed for Veracruz in early October. The pair were visited at Christmas time the following year by Loisel's old friend Roy Antibus, who, according to the Mansfield News, viewed the Loisel pineapple plantation as quite an enterprise and liable to develop into a big thing. The paper additionally reported that Antibus saw the Mansfield People's Rubber Plantation while in the country. The pineapple and rubber plantations here are likely the same plantation complex. Loisel's 1917 account indicates that he was funding the plantation's daily operations out of his own pocket at this point, allowing him to keep up appearances for visitors like Antibus. But in 1911, Loisel started court proceedings to, quote, recover the money due me, end quote. He obtained a judgment against myself as agent in 1914, which means that he lost in court, not a surprising verdict if the company had been dissolved, and he began almost desperately trying to sell the property. Indeed, his claim for $25,000 was formally denied by the U.S. Secretary of State in 1923 because no proof was submitted that Loisel abandoned the property and incurred such losses as a result of any acts of armed forces in Mexico. As Loisel wrote to friend B.J. Balliet in May 1914, he and his wife fled the plantation at the first sign of outbreak, but they had no intention of returning to the United States unless compelled to do so, because they still had business interests in Mexico. According to Loisel's letter, the Mexican authorities wished us to leave as they could not give us protection from the hoodlums they feared, in reality, bandits, who have become quite numerous through our section. Ironically, when Loisel was still fighting for the money owed to him, and the fighting was still raging in Mexico, the Mansfield News reported that the big plantation Loisel was managing has not suffered to any extent during the revolution in that country. But we know that Loisel and his wife had lost property when the plantation was looted a year earlier in 1916, which the Mansfield News had reported on, before declaring everything was fine in March 1917. But then again, they admitted in 1914 that they were slightly basing their judgment of the crisis in Mexico on the fact Loisel, a steady subscriber of the newspaper, has never sent any notice to have his address in Mexico changed. Loisel and his wife remained in Mexico until 1925. According to Sarah Loisel's 1919 passport application, she and her husband had lived in Veracruz until 1918, and then moved to Tampico, where he had secured work with the Standard Oil Company. Much like G.H. Gilpatrick, Loisel went into the drugstore business upon his return to the United States. By 1932, he was operating the Loisel drugstore at 16 North Diamond Street, but the business was sold in early 1937 as Loisel was approaching 78 years old, and it became Care's Medicine Store. Loisel passed away on June 24, 1939, at the age of 80. His obituary in the Mansfield News Journal states he operated the Loisel Bread and Milk Company until his retirement some years ago. No mention is made of the 17 years he and his wife spent in Mexico during the Revolution. The story of Louis Loisel and the Pan American Planters Company illustrates in fairly broad strokes that local history is very rarely confined to local sources. Here we have a Mansfield baker, originally from Canada, who moved to Mexico to work for an Indiana company that was incorporated in Illinois. Given such varying geographic influences, this research required digging through newspapers from multiple states, trade magazines, government reports, and passport records. Yet even with this extensive research, there are still several open questions. What happened to James Bryden? How was Loisel selected for the plantation manager job? Was the company dissolved or not? And what happened after 1908? Now, the questions I was able to answer, mainly what was our Mansfield baker doing in Mexico in 1908, required the use of several research databases to get at the most pertinent records and information. Alongside my patrons, I have access to the digitized collections of our local newspapers, multiple Ohio newspapers on NewspaperArchive, Ancestry, and archive.org, along with anything else openly accessible on the internet. But as I said at the top, I also dipped into resources that my patrons don't have access to, namely my personal accounts for newspapers.com and NewspaperArchive. So you can see here, the titles highlighted in red are things that I had access to, but my patrons don't, which is largely newspapers published outside Ohio and the one published outside the United States. Now, that's important to think about because if I was a patron trying to replicate this research, what would I be missing? First and foremost, I would be missing the brief news about the company possibly dissolving in 1904, since that came from a Chicago newspaper. I'd be missing the name of the plantation manager who appears in the 1906 company report, since that came from a Maryland newspaper, and that company report entirely I would be missing since that was shared with me by the Chicago History Museum. The listing of stock shares for sale in 1904 and G.H. Gilpatrick's supposed abandonment of the company in 1907 came from Indiana newspapers. And barring one Ohio newspaper, Charles Foster's role as president of the company is information found exclusively in the papers of Indiana. Now, you could argue that these are small details and our understanding of what Loisel was doing in Mexico isn't greatly impacted by their absence, but within these details is arguably where Loisel's trust in the company originated. That would be Foster's role, and a potential answer for how he became involved with the company and why he was still in Mexico in the midst of the revolution. My original hypothesis here was that in taking away access to those non-Ohio sources, the resulting narrative would be skewed to put an unwarranted spotlight on Mansfield, suggesting the Pan American Planters Company was strangely fixated on recruiting investors from Mansfield. And while that's not entirely the case, since Ohio sources still indicate there was a Pan American Planters presence in other states, you would need the Indiana newspapers to get a full picture of the company's stock returns, if that was part of the story you were trying to tell, because Elwood published more about the company than anyone else. So I did an experiment specifically for this presentation to see if I was a patron, could I find the same information that appears in the blog post? The answer is yes, but it's not easy. Like I said, I heavily relied upon the digitized collections available on newspapers.com. I don't get paid to promote their service, but I really should because I recommend it to everyone. It's the best investment I ever made. As a patron, I can still access the same digitized content for our local papers, but I have to use two different databases to get there. Through a partnership with Advantage Archives, our oldest papers dating back to 1800 were digitized from our microfilm collection. And to get to this first collection, I would first have to navigate to the library's website and find the local history and genealogy page, scroll down to the bottom, and click on Learn More under the Digital Newspaper Archive. From there, I have to click the Search Newspapers button, and then it finally takes me to the database where I can search or browse. Coverage in this database only goes to about 1926. and it does not include much from our main newspaper, the Mansfield News Journal, which has been in print in some form since at least 1891. To access the digitized news journal, I have to navigate to the research databases page of our website and either scroll down to the Mansfield News Journal or narrow my results to newspapers through the selections you have there on the left. When I click on the news journal, I'm taken to ProQuest, but I can't start my search just yet because the very first thing I have to type into the search box is the word Mansfield, which takes me to the 5 known versions of the news journal. I have to know the rough date range that I am researching within, because unlike newspapers.com or even our Advantage Archives collection, this database will not search all the versions of the paper at the same time. So I select the version I need and can then start my search. That's far more steps than just going to newspapers.com and putting in a search term, and it requires a great deal of internal knowledge for patrons to, number one, know that these 2 databases exist since they're on 2 different parts of our website, and number 2, know how to navigate them. This first step for ProQuest of searching the term Mansfield isn't spelled out anywhere for our patrons. Additionally, the results list on ProQuest only gives you a limited preview of the content. For very obvious reasons, the October 2nd, 1908 piece on ProQuest here does not draw my attention in the same way the February 28th, 1913 piece on newspapers.com does. And I've seen patrons struggle to get back to their search results on ProQuest once they've clicked into one of the results. Patrons also have access to US Midwest news stream through ProQuest, but it's primarily for more recent publications and news produced since the 1980s. Even if US Midwest news stream did offer access to the Indiana and Illinois newspapers I used for this research, the initial search returns results. This has always tripped me up. The initial search returns results from scholarly journals, dissertations, newspapers, historical newspapers, and trade journals. Patrons would have to narrow their search to newspapers or historic newspapers here on the left, based on whether their research is before or after 1980. So for my base search here of Loisel, Midwest Newsstream didn't offer anything, it didn't offer access to anything I couldn't get from the other 2 newspaper databases that I previously mentioned. And it offered nothing outside Ohio when I looked at historic newspapers. Side note with that, I ran this same search a second time the same day I built this presentation, and I wasn't even given the option to search historic newspapers. So this is a very hit or miss database from my experience. To replicate my research on NewspaperArchive, I would be limited as a patron because that database is only accessible if I'm physically present in the main branch of the library. It also suffers from not so great content previews that don't let you quickly judge whether an article is relevant to you or not, but it is a far easier database to navigate than the other digitized newspaper databases I've talked about. And with only 11 results here, I wouldn't really mind going through and reading all of them. That's not that many. Ancestry also has the physical limitations like NewspaperArchive, but it can be accessed at any of our library locations. As a patron, I also have access to Family Search, which doesn't have that physical limitation. And with a decent amount of overlap between the 2 databases, Family Search is quite good as well. For my purposes, I was only interested in basic vital record information, birth, death, marriage, and any information related to Loisel's travel to Mexico. Ancestry was a gold mine for that, and Ancestry is a lot easier to narrow down results for things like passports and immigration information, a little bit more than Family Search, but both still pretty easy. And I don't think patrons would have any real trouble replicating my research on these 2 platforms, barring the one physical limitation. The rest of the research process relied on knowing what digital and non-digital repositories are out there, like archive.org, and just being persistent. That's the primary thing that I teach my patrons, especially with this digital research. Be persistent, because What was not digitally available yesterday might be tomorrow. And it also requires tweaking your search criteria because spelling mistakes happen both in the original documents and the OCR indexed results. The number of misspellings for Santa Isabel throughout NewspaperArchive and newspapers.com and all that is ridiculous. What I've learned from doing the original research for the blog and revisiting it for this presentation is that having access to the information is important, but the functional usability of those access points might be just a bit more important. They say you get what you pay for, and I know libraries are not institutions with the biggest budgets, but are we doing a disservice to our patrons by relying on more cost-effective databases that require multiple hoops to be jumped through just to get to the point where you can start your search? If I was a patron trying to use that Mansfield News Journal thing without having that first step, without knowing about it, I'd give up pretty quickly because it doesn't return anything useful. And when we only offer access to those local sources, are we limiting what research can be done and what stories can be told? In another blog post I wrote this year, I focused on a Mansfield couple who set out to walk to California. Without being able to chart the coverage of their journey through other states, it would have remained an unanswered question as to whether they made it to California or not. Spoiler alert, they didn't go beyond Indiana. I don't really know why, but they just kind of stopped. The unintentional theme that has emerged for my blog posts this year is Mansfield goes traveling, because I keep finding interesting stories of Mansfielders on the move, whether as this couple, pedestrians wanting to do something out of the ordinary, or Loisel, a businessman following some international opportunities, or immigrants looking for a new homeland. People rarely stay in one place. I moved here from Louisiana this year. So why should their history? I'm by no means an expert in Mansfield history. Again, I've only been here since January, trying to learn it. And I'm not an expert in information literacy either. Again, working on it. But as I said at the top of this presentation, if we're in a position to support students and patrons doing that high-level research, whether it be academic or even just genealogy, if they want to go super deep into it, we at least need to give some thought to how the databases and information we offer access to could impact their final product if those databases have built-in barriers to full access or are restricting information. So thank you for joining me through this journey to Mexico and beyond. If you have any desire to read more of my history research, you can do so at theshermanroom.wordpress.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chandler. That was a fascinating presentation. You know, it's an interesting story, and I love the spin on access and usability that you put on it. That was wonderful. All right, so we do have a little bit of time for any questions. Courtney, have any questions come in through the chat?
Yes, Brandy wants to talk to Daniel about
Oh yeah, see,
yes,
I knew I needed the
reminder.
reminder because
So you go ahead and unmute.
Recently one of my coworkers and a librarian said that he and his partner went to a Pride Festival in Baton Rouge, and he noticed that there were like vendor tables and other like information tables set up, but it was very obvious that there were no institutions there, no libraries there. So I was wondering, you know, that made us start talking about possibly doing something like that, but what kind of things would we have at our table? Because we were talking about having showing off the diversity in our collection, but then also just being there just to, you know, show up. And we found it interesting that it was especially apparent that like LSU was not there. It was something in Baton Rouge. And I'm wondering like why people are not taking this as a recruiting opportunity, because he said that it was a lot of families there, a lot of like college-aged people. So thoughts on that, tips for if we do try to sign up for something at a Pride Festival, what could we be promoting?
Well, I will say, first of all, like, it's great that y'all want to do that. I think I love that y'all want to be proactive about that. The New Orleans Public Library was at uh, New Orleans Pride. So I would talk to them as a library, even if, it's not the same type of library, but as a library that's at an event like that, I would speak to them about what they're doing there. Um, and I can't speak to LSU, but I do know that um, there were some organizations that I'm very involved with my church. I'm on the church vestry. Um, I'm Episcopalian. Episcopalians, they love gay people and trans people. They can be priests. And the Episcopal Church was there. So it's sort of weird that the Episcopal Church was there, but like LSU, who definitely has lots of LGBTQ plus students, wasn't there to support their students. So any way that we can show that support, and the reason that the Episcopal Church was there was because we wanted to make sure that people knew that there was a place for them, even if they felt that were unwelcome other places. You are welcome here, and uh, just being there, showing up as a library does that. It says that our library is a safe space for you. You're going to be affirmed here. You're going to be accepted for who you are here. So just being there is huge. But then also if you have like flyers about like if there's any programs you have, if there's either library programs or if it's programs at the school that have to do with gender topics or LGBTQ topics, if there's anything going on like that that you can promote, even if it's something that's not happening right then, because it's June, there's not a lot of people in school right then. But if there's something else going on, like there's going to be a back to school event that that your student government is going to be putting together, talk about that so that LGBTQ students know that they're welcome in these spaces. Just having the materials there, even if it doesn't have an LGBTQ slant on it, just having those materials there so that the students know that they're welcome in these places. I would also maybe get in touch with your student government, see if there's a Gender and Sexualities Alliance, see if y'all can do something together. You might be able to partner with them. They may be looking to do something and
Yes, we
just
have a
need,
student organization called Prism on campus, and we were going to reach out to them to
yeah.
partner with.
And if they're not already doing something, it may be that they feel like the will isn't there. And this will demonstrate, no, we want to do this with you. So I hope that helps.
All right. Yes. Thanks for the tips. We haven't done many community events, and so we just did one recently here in Thibodaux that just got our juices flowing, like trying to look for more ways to do some community events.
Yeah, I think those are great suggestions. Courtney, were there any other questions?
There are no other questions, but Samantha put in the chat that she'd be happy to connect with anyone with their outreach department because Shreve Memorial Library has participated in several LGBTQ plus events.
Very good. I'll just wait another minute to see if there are any last minute questions before we wrap up. If anyone else has any thoughts.
This was great. Thank y'all so much. And I'm excited this year that we had a lot of like archival primary sources type presentations because we have an archives at Nichols that we do want to try to promote more. So I appreciate hearing those stories and those ways that you guys use the research for the primary sources. So really, thank you, everybody. I really loved the forum this year.
I think there was really good diversity of presentation topics and different types of libraries this year. That was great.
Yeah, and I just wanted to pop on for half a second to thank all of our attendees and to our participants. This has been a really excellent year and a really great panel of of presentations. So thank you everyone, and yeah, here's to another great year, and hopefully it'll be better next year too.
For sure. So, all right, if there aren't any more questions, I'll just quickly remind everybody, we're going to drop the link for our social media channels into the chat, as well as a link to an evaluation form to get feedback on the presentation. So if you have ideas for us of how we could improve this, things you want to see next year, please let us know. We're very open to suggestions and feedback. Finally, if you want to rewatch today's presentations or anything from earlier in the week, we are going to be posting those recordings to our YouTube channel. If you have questions or comments, you can feel free to email us at nolailc@gmail.com. And thank you all for coming. I think it's been a really great week and a really great forum, and we hope to see you all again next year. So take care, enjoy the rest of your summer, what's left of it, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all.